Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Rotten Tomatoes is Wrong, the podcast that is hosted by me, Mark Ellis. Hello, welcome back. And to Jacqueline Coley is here.
Hi.
She's back, akin to the villain that we're talking about in this horror franchise. You just can't get rid of her. She takes some vacations. She takes some work trips. She's back. Jacqueline, you've been all over the globe. You've been jet setting. You've been hobnobbing. You've been watching movies, drinking champagne. How is thee?
I'm good. I'm glad to be back. You guys were admirable. I loved the Topher Grace episode. I will say all of them were great, but having that moment, having you have your thing, and also I might add, because Mark knows that that was my first crush.
Was Topher Grace?
Yeah.
Yes, you picked the right one.
Yeah, that was my first crush. It was
some ladies picked me. They picked the wrong one.
They picked the wrong one. Well, I'm glad we did. And look, I am back, and it's good that we're doing it on this one because I literally think Freddie's back, payback. This is just it's like a moment of return, don't you think?
I think that you can never quite shake Freddy Krueger. I don't care how one of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies ends. If you're like, oh, finally we can go back to sleep. It's like, Kenya, for how long? I would take Metallica's advice and sleep with one eye open because you never know with Freddy Krueger. Jacqueline and I were back talking together. It's like our conversation fits like an old glove, like somebody else relies on that has a lot of razor blades on it. Jacqueline,
nice.
you have a very different relationship with scary movies in general than I do. So I want to get into that once we actually start the movie talk portion, like where we're all coming from psychologically into these horror movies. But for right now, there's an editorial shout out I want to give because we're here in the midst of spooky season. It's Halloween season. It's dentists love this time of year. And there's a great article on RottenTomatoes.com that's all the Nightmare on Elm Street movies ranked. And so you can see the ranking according to Tomato Meter, which our good friend Tim Ryan is about to reveal to us. But it's just a fun sort of walk for me anyway down memory lane of my childhood, seeing and it's a moment of pride for me, Jacqueline, because you know the movies in the Nightmare on Elm Street canon that really had an effect on me that I still have an affinity for, and I think they're very well represented. Yes. Is what I'll say. I think I did good with my opinions, and I feel validated by the Tomato Meter.
I think you're right on that. And also, can I just say, whenever I think of you, Mark, I very much think of you as a guy that went away to the very idyllic, no offense, waspy summer camps. I know you probably weren't, but I'm I just feel like you had an Indian summer somewhere in your past.
Do you think I was like one of the other kids at that camp that they went to in Addams Family Values? Is that what you're accusing me of? Okay, this is what happens when we haven't seen each other in a while. But I actually did go to a summer camp that was right next door to a nuclear power plant, and I was watching the 3 Mile Island documentary on Netflix last night. It wasn't a 3 Mile Island one, but that's where I went. So it was pretty much like I was in The Simpsons. You know Nightmare on Elm Street. We love Freddy Krueger, even though he's the one murdering teenagers. I don't know who to root for, a guy from hell who's evil or teenagers. It's a tough call there. And it just sort of repeats. And then you have these rises and these falls. You get sequelitis sometimes with the Nightmare on Elm Street, but then you get something wholly original, like Wes Craven's New Nightmare. You get to see Freddy and Jason tussle. You get to see a remake. So we want to get into our opinions here on A Nightmare on Elm Street. And we're going to do that today with a very special guest who is well-versed in all things horror. He doesn't just watch the horror movies, he makes them. He has directed a few brilliant short films with his company, Amateur Hour Films. He is the host of the Wangers podcast alongside our producer, Brian Perez, and Cody Hall. And occasionally he puts me through my paces as a producer at Rotten Tomatoes. It is the owner of Draco the Wonder Dog, Christian Ruvalcaba, making his first guest appearance here on Rotten Tomatoes is Wrong. Good day, sir.
Hello. Thank you guys so much for having me. This is so much fun. This is my favorite time of the year. It's spooky month. And what better way to celebrate that than talking my favorite horror franchise of all time?
Oh
you a costume guy?
No. It's my favorite time, but I never dress up. Never do.
Really?
Now that I have a dog, now I'm going to have to dress up. We're dressing him up, so I have to be part of it.
This is a recent dog edition?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay,
yeah.
So and you named him Draco?
Yeah, when we got him from the shelter, my girlfriend's a huge Harry Potter fan, and his full name already was Draco Malfoy, and she was like, he's perfect. So So he's our little Draco Malfoy. He doesn't act. He's more of a Hufflepuff, really.
I mean, that's like kind of naming your kid Joffrey. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
I think I'll defend Christian just with the Joffrey example because I feel like Draco was the name of that kid, that evil kid, and then Joffrey came along.
True.
And it's like, now you can name your kid Draco again. You just can't name him Joffrey anymore.
Yeah.
Fair. Like, there's a worse kid. Because remember, back in our day, it was like the good son. It was Macaulay Culkin and the good son. That was like the crazy kid you didn't want to be. I'm dating myself.
With Christian Rubalcaba as a producer and engineer, might be recording a Versus episode of the career of Elijah Wood versus not Macaulay Culkin, but Elijah Wood gets a lot of mention in The Good Son in the vid. So There's a lot of stuff going on here at Rotten Tomatoes. We're very excited about all of it. Christian Rubalcaba is on board. He did a deep dive into Nightmare on Elm Street. I've been doing a deep dive my entire life, and Jacqueline has her highlights and lowlights as well. So before we get into movie talk, and there's a lot to discuss here with everybody's favorite stand-up comic / evil villain child murderer, let's go to Rotten Tomatoes is Wrong's own review curate. He really does the reviews for really everybody that submits their reviews. It's Tim Ryan. He's the guy that sort of puts it all together, gets the percentage along with our great team at Rotten Tomatoes. So Tim Ryan is going to tell us what the critics were saying about the releases of Nightmare on Elm Street, the highlights. He's going to run us down the list from tomato meter top to bottom. Tim Ryan, it's your 2 minutes. Take it away.
2 minutes with Tim.
Like any horror franchise, the Nightmare on Elm Street films have had their ups and downs. That said, the Freddy Krueger saga has a higher share of undeniable winners than many of its ilk. And critics and audiences are generally in agreement about each entry in the series. Let's break it down. A Nightmare on Elm Street from 1984 is certified fresh at 95% on the tomato meter, and it has an 84% audience score. A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge from 1985 is rotten at 40%, and it has a 33% audience score. A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors from 1987 is fresh at 72%, and it has a 68% audience score. A Nightmare on Elm Street 4, The Dream Master from 1988 is rotten at 53% and has a 43% audience score. A Nightmare on Elm Street 5, The Dream Child from 1989 is rotten at 28% and it has a 31% audience score. The, in retrospect, mistitled Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare from 1991 is rotten at 23% and it has a 32% audience score. Wes Craven's New Nightmare from 1994 is certified fresh at 79% and it has a 66% audience score. The Friday the 13th crossover Freddy vs. Jason from 2003 is rotten at 42% and it has a 50% audience score. And finally, the 2010 reboot A Nightmare on Elm Street is rotten at 14% and it has a 43% audience score. So what did the critics have to say? In a fresh review for the 1984 Nightmare on Elm Street, Variety called it a highly imaginative horror film that provides the requisite shocks to keep fans of the genre happy. However, in a rotten review for the 2010 Nightmare on Elm Street, Mick LaSalle of the San Francisco Chronicle wrote, "People have dreams and either get their guts ripped out or don't get their guts ripped out. And then, after 90 or so minutes are used up, the movie finds some weak pretext for ending." So that's the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. And here's a weird bit of trivia. Almost 28 years prior to this recording, on October 14th, 1994, you could head down to the theater to watch the certified fresh Wes Craven's New Nightmare. Or, among the other certified fresh opening releases, you could take your pick between Pulp Fiction, The Shawshank Redemption, Hoop Dreams, or the indie romantic comedy I Like It Like That. Oh, and Ed Wood and Quiz Show hit theaters the week before, and Clerks would be released the week after. So, pretty good stretch for movies. Back to you folks.
All right, pretty good little pocket of movie-going lore there with, I don't know what you take if you're going to the movies, and I'm sure a lot of folks would say Pulp Fiction. I would probably end up walking into Wes Craven's New Nightmare. Christian, if those are your options that you just heard in 1994 when you were still a zygote, where are you walking into? What's the theater?
I mean, Mark, you know I'm a huge basketball guy. I'm going Hoop Dreams. No,
it's a great documentary, and it got snubbed at the Oscars.
It is a great documentary, but I'm there with Nightmare for sure. And then I hear the buzz about Pulp Fiction. I'll go in and check that out afterwards.
I believe one of those people buzzing about Pulp Fiction is going to be Jacqueline. I think this is where we part ways, right?
Yes.
Anyway, maybe we'll talk about that on a future episode. Who knows what's going to happen here? But for right now, let's hit the music for movie talk. Finally. It's just like, I know it freaks people out, but I think Christian is the same way. It just, you start talking about a franchise like this that is so steeped in horror lore, and it's just this mythologically great villain, if not all the movies living up to that. It's just like a warm blanket for us, Jacqueline, but you seem to have a different outlook on scary movies. What is your take on scary movies? What was it when you were a kid? What ingratiated you to it? What steered you away from it? Now we're here as adults and you feel how?
I hate scary movies, or I did. I don't. I love them now. But when I was like younger, what it was is the first thing I watched that was scary was Tales from the Crypt and the Twilight Zone.
Yes.
And I learned very quickly with horror, certain scary things I was cool with, and certain scary things would mean my mother was in my room at 4 or 5 times in the night with screaming jags. And so horror wasn't that I didn't enjoy it, it was just unsafe. I have since aged and matured, and the nightmares don't like come to me. But literally, I remember I was like 16 and went on a date, and you know how boys were back in the day. Take her to the scary movie, dog. Like,
yeah, we're still kind of like that.
Yeah, like let me tell you how this went down. He took me to the scary movie. She was traumatized and never spoke to him again.
What was the movie?
It was The Grudge. And it wasn't even that scary, but I was done. I was done with him. I told you I didn't want to see a scary movie. I told you I didn't like scary movies. And then you took me to a scary movie. I had nightmares, so I called him the next morning and broke up with him. No lie. Terry, if you're listening to this, I stand by it.
Poor Terry. Terry, you don't... Here's the problem with taking someone to a scary movie that you're romantically interested in. You don't take them to a scary movie where a lot of the stuff happens in the bedroom, because then if you happen to get lucky later on, maybe Jacqueline and Terry probably too young, but you get into the bedroom, then you're just thinking about that and that scene, which is why Nightmare on Elm Street, great horror movies, I don't know that they're necessarily date night horror fare. Christian, your gateway into horror movies in general, let's back up a step, was what? And did you take to it immediately? Did you get freaked out? What was the play?
Well, I'm in a similar boat with Jacqueline, because I too was a big scaredy cat. Like I just hated everything scary, even to like scenes from like Jurassic Park. Everything was terrifying to me. And it was actually the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise that really got me into horror. The movie that actually got me into it was Freddy's Revenge, Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, because I was at a sleepover with friends, and his mom got a couple VHSs from Blockbuster. You guys remember those? And she said, I got Nightmare on Elm Street. All the kids were all excited, and I was like, yeah, cool. And I didn't want to be that one guy that was like, no, I don't want to watch that. I'd rather watch Willy Wonka.
Can't be a fraidy cat in that situation. Can't admit it.
Even that movie has some scary stuff in it. But
yes, it does.
She pops it in, and it turns out to be Freddy's Revenge, Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2. And if anybody knows anything about that movie, it's a little silly, and there's actually some subtext to it that I would learn later about it in life. But the movie like kind of taught me that horror movies don't have to be always that scary. It doesn't always have to be, The Exorcist or the Blair Witch Project, that they can be kind of fun and silly. And that really kind of that kind of opened it up. And then over the years, I just started liking the more twisted and messed up stuff.
It is a gateway. It is walking through that gate, and so it's literal in the sense of A Nightmare on Elm Street, because a lot of times when a teenager has fallen asleep, even though they're trying to stay awake and they're going to tussle with Freddy, they find themselves standing in front of a house with a creepy gate, and there's like a tricycle, and it's like, oh, don't walk into the house. They always walk into the house. We know what's going to happen after that. Don't go to the boiler room. So you are making great points here. Jacqueline, you really should do more podcasting. Here's the thing. Because like Jacqueline said that she loved watching Tales from the Crypt as a kid. And the genius of Tales from the Crypt, and the thing that made it palatable to me, is that the Crypt Keeper himself was horrendous looking, scary, but funny. Could deliver a joke, could have a funny setup and a nice payoff. Same thing with Freddy Krueger. And so whereas The Exorcist, and I'll even give you some credit for The Grudge, Jacqueline, because there's not a lot of levity in those movies. There's not a lot of joking around. Freddy himself, particularly as the movies continued to make more sequels, Freddy got funnier and funnier, and it was almost like you were rooting for Freddy.
Oh, no, let me give it to you. Camp. Freddy is the original drag queen, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Let me tell you, I can't wait till we get deeper into it. But no, Freddy is drag. Freddy is camp. Freddy is heightened costumery. And so, like every ounce of that, the more they leaned into it. And Robert is Englund.
Englund.
Yeah.
Sis. He is sassier than a gay man on RuPaul's Drag Race. I love it. We have a great video, and I really hope, Brian, you pull it up, where Jordan Peele talks about Freddie, and he says like how much he loves that movie, and he's just like, dinner served. Like just that level of like gore and camp. Leprechaun does that really well too.
When we got to the 80s and the supernatural killers and like Freddy's out there killing, you know, people and you know, doing like a bit like, you know, dinner's served, you know, when you're doing the bit, he became like a surrogate for the audience in this weird way. And I feel like he tapped into some suppressed aggression, something that needed to get out, and it became this different kind of interactive experience where you start cheering and rooting for the killer, and the teenagers you know, become less and less likable in their portrayal.
If we look at the movies, though, I mean, at some point the movie has to hold up. Like, I think that's the thing that sunk the Leprechaun, is that we love him, he's cute, he's funny, but the movie's never really that good. The first A Nightmare on Elm Street, way back in 1984, I think has earned its place as the #1 movie on this list. But Christian, you're our esteemed guest today. I'll turn it over to you. When you hear that rundown that Tim Ryan gave us from top to bottom, it's on RottenTomatoes.com right now. What is your take? Is it accurate? Do you have a lot of beef there?
No, I mean, I think maybe some of the movies being rotten is a little too harsh. I mean, I also have a personal just like love for these movies. I can recognize that they're not like of the best quality, especially when you know a lot of the behind the scenes and the production of a lot of these films where they just kind of rushed it and were writing as they were making them. But like, I think the top three being the original Nightmare, Wes Craven's New Nightmare, and Dream Warriors is totally perfect and accurate. I would give a little bit more room for Freddy vs. Jason, because that is like the most fun movie I think I've ever seen. And then also Freddy's Revenge, that one too, because it has just a soft spot in my heart. I think there's some really good stuff in that one. Again, there's a little bit of behind the scenes for that movie, which if you want to, a great companion piece to Freddy's Revenge is actually a documentary called Scream Queen, My Nightmare on Elm Street. It is wonderful. Mark Patton, who stars in that movie, went through so much stuff in that movie, and now he's kind of, you know, taken what he was referred to as back then as like the first like male scream queen, and he's just taken it to heart and actually like owning it now, and for the longest time he didn't. So there's a lot of history with that and the rest of the franchise, but I think the list overall is pretty solid.
Yeah, Jacqueline, I would look at A Nightmare on Elm Street from 1984, the original one, with the same eyes that I would even do John Carpenter's 1978 Halloween, simply because those were made on shoestring budgets. Halloween cost under $400,000 to make, and obviously turned a huge profit. A Nightmare on Elm Street cost around $1 million to make, which wasn't a lot of money even back then, and it ended up grossing $57 million. It was a hit. It felt original. It's Wes Craven behind the camera. So when you see that movie, you see the potential not just for this movie to be a recurring scary classic around this time of year, but you really do see a franchise being launched.
Yeah, I mean, that's the kicker with this too. And I think what's interesting with horror, and one of the reasons why I like came around on horror, is with franchises, when they're done well, and even if there's like bad entries or high up entries, so long as they all hold the same, I think, tone and theme, you can like fall in love with it the way that Christian does. And so I think, look, is a lot of them, you know, want to throw it out of the boat? Sure. But I also think there's later entries, and I would absolutely agree on Freddy versus Jason, where even though they stayed within the tone of Nightmare Before Elm Street, they still pushed it in a way. And it's like they built a framework and an archetype, and the directors that I think are the best are the ones that push those, but didn't like abandon them. The later entries abandon them.
Yeah.
Freddy versus Jason it's 42% rotten, and its audience score is 50%. And if we just want to dive into that movie. I will say that I can agree with the audience. I cannot get fresh on that movie. I was so excited for that. And I get that they're trying to lean into the tone of the 80s, but they're still trying to modernize it for 2003, I think is when it was released. And it's these two iconic villains going back and forth. And I just felt so like this should be epic, and it never felt like that to me. It felt like just a slowly the air coming out of a pool float until the end when there's this battle, and then they're just setting us up for this ridiculous sequel with Jason walking out of the water after we think that he's killed Freddy and decapitated him. He's holding Freddy's head, and the last thing you see is Freddy wink. I want a definitive winner, or I want more movies. Like, you got to give me one or the other. You can't just have that be the last thing that we see. Sorry, that alone deserves a rotten rating from me.
Yeah. No, I get it. Especially because the movie has such a great concept behind it. The fact that people aren't afraid of Freddy anymore. So he uses Jason to install that fear so he can come back. I think the only flaw to that is that the movie ends up being more of a Friday the 13th movie than it's a Nightmare movie. Yeah. The sequences that we have with Freddy are few, and they're great because he actually pulls Jason into his dream and you throwing him around like a pinball. It's great.
That's a cool scene. Yeah.
It's really, really cool. But you don't even get a lot of Freddy kills. I think he only kills like one person in the entire movie, and it's mostly a Jason movie. So there's a lot of stuff that they could have like done, and that movie was in development hell for the longest time. Fun fact: did you know what one of the like proposed endings would have been for that movie?
No.
It's got to be better than the wink. Give it to me.
One of the pitches, I think maybe there's storyboard for it, but as the two are fighting each other, then all of a sudden like they get like pulled into hell, and Pinhead pulls them apart and tells them to cut it out. And he says, "Stop it. You two need to stop doing this." And they introduce Pinhead into it. And there's also comic books, I think, where they do more Freddy vs. Jason. Ash from Evil Dead gets involved as well. So there's a lot of fanfic out there.
People still love Hellraiser. People still love Hellraiser.
Can I just say this? Because I feel like we're going to get to this episode and we're not going to be able to really dive deep into the encyclopedic knowledge of what Christian has inside his brain. So can I just take a moment of frivolity and have you, I'm not even kidding, like I'm dead ass on this. Give me like the top 3 like shocking Christian things that you've got on the Nightmare from Elm Street franchise. Because I guarantee you they're better than anything we would be able to say for the rest of this episode. Legit, like just give me like 3 or like just give me one of your favorite mind-blowing Nightmare on Elm Street facts. Just one great one. A good one. Like your favorite one.
My favorite one.
Christian, think on this for a minute because I got a good one for Jacqueline too. Because it's one that I learned in prepping for this episode is that they around the year 2000, they were, because again, this is coming off of the heat, the critical and fan heat from Wes Craven's New Nightmare, which was sort of a resurgence because it was so meta and it was like looking into Freddy and then Freddy looking deeper into Freddy, and Robert Englund and Heather Langenkamp are back, and it's a really cool journey inside the mind of Wes Craven. And then in 2000, there were plans to develop a prequel to the first Nightmare on Elm Street that was going to be set in hell, at least partially. And so you get to sort of see that, and you might get to see like the parents getting together and killing Freddy in real life. But it was scrapped. And a big reason why it was scrapped is because the Adam Sandler movie, Little Nicky, which was also set primarily in hell, did not do well at the box office. It was the first big bomb for Adam Sandler.
That was the first big bomb for Adam Sandler.
And so then New Line is like, we can't do movies based in hell. It's not going to work. And so we didn't get the prequel. And I think that would have been a cool way to take it. But yeah, so that's my little factoid for the day. Christian, what's your mic drop moment?
Well, I will say, I'll say any facts that I know, it's all because of it. And maybe this could be one of them, is because there is a great like 6-hour documentary on the Nightmare on Elm Street series called Never Sleep Again. It's a Nightmare Legacy or something like that. It is awesome because it does take you through all the behind the scenes, and it's all the producers, it's Wes Craven, it's a lot of the actors, and they tell it as it is. They say, this is BS, this was crap. We had to write all this stuff because the studio wanted to do it. Bob Shea had his hand in this franchise and had to be like in every single, like he makes cameos in every single one of these movies just because he really, really wanted to. And then I think one of the coolest things is like right around where New Nightmare came out. They came to Wes Craven. They said they wanted him to make another one. And he's like, all right, fine. Let me take a look at all these movies and I'll see what I can do. And he actually had the idea for New Nightmare like around the time I think Dream Warriors came out. Or it was kind of like floating in his brain a little bit. So after he rewatched everything, he said, all right, you know what? I'll do another one, but I'm going to do it my way. And he literally casts Bob Shaye. He casts like an executive producer, all the actors, Robert Englund, Heather Langenkamp, and everybody comes back. And he just has this play on this franchise in Hollywood and making this movie meta and making Freddy an actual demon. And honestly, one of the scariest versions of Freddy I think we've ever seen. Still a couple of his little quips here and there, like you want to play Skin the Cat. All that really great stuff, but it's just fascinating. I think almost more so than these movies, as much as I love them, the behind the scenes and all the drama that happened behind all them is just as fascinating because it shows you how these movies are made. And I would love to see something like another like 6 or 8 hour documentary series on the paranormal movies or the Saw franchise, because I'm sure they ran into those same things where they were kind of just writing as they were coming out because they were forced to make these movies.
I've never heard a boring backstory on a classic horror film. The Exorcist clearly has like the curse set, as does Poltergeist. The Conjuring, like they built a house to recreate it, but that house still started making people feel real uncomfortable. So it's really intriguing stuff going all the way back deep into Wes Craven's history, because the name Freddy Krueger actually came from Wes's childhood. Fred Krueger was the name of a school bully that used to tease Wes Craven. And so I'd say he got his comeuppance.
Oh my God. That guy is probably so sick.
He
is big mad on that one.
Yeah, but knowing school bullies, he probably still wears his varsity jacket and he's drinking at Chili's at 2 p.m. and he's trying to tell anybody that will listen that he's the real Fred Krueger. So if you look at what we consider to be the greatest Nightmare on Elm Street movie of all time, like I can hear an argument, obviously, for the original one. I think it's earned its place. 95% certified fresh is very, very high for any horror movie. I think it's earned it just on premise alone, and it sets us up. There's a great kill where Johnny Depp gets sucked into a bed. It's awesome.
Beautiful. Yes,
but
wonderful.
If you say, Mark, what's the best Nightmare on Elm Street movie? And I might say it might be my favorite horror movie of all time, not named The Exorcist, Nightmare on Elm Street 3, The Dream Warriors. Oh, yeah. Here we go. First of all, it's directed by Chuck Russell, who would go on to do The Mask. And this film is great because we get peak Freddy being scary and also peak comedy Freddy at the same time. Freddy is in full control of his creative kill powers. He turns one poor kid into a meat puppet and throws him off a roof. He does another thing where he takes a girl who's addicted to watching television because that's how she'll stay awake. She's watching the Dick Cavett show, and Dick Cavett makes a cameo in the movie because he turns into Freddy Krueger, and she gets stuffed into the TV set, and then Freddy says, now you're on prime time. It's so good. And the real selling point of this is twofold for me, though. Is that it's the return of Heather Langenkamp, maybe the best final girl ever, with apologies to Jamie Lee Curtis, because she played Nancy, and she's the original teen in A Nightmare on Elm Street that survives, and we think everything's okay. And then she's out. Everybody's out for Freddy 2, and then we get back into her story where she's now a counselor for troubled teens, and she can relate to them all too well. So the teens around town, they're seeing these things, they're having these dreams, they're acting weird, they send them to this mental institution. She comes in, and when there's a sit around and they're just having a meeting, it's a rap session, and the kids are like, look, you adults just do not get it. You don't understand what we're going through. And then Nancy says, I know who you're talking about. He wears a dirty brown hat. It's like, oh, I still get chills just talking about it. And then you have the reveal that I think is such a great reveal for the mythology of A Nightmare on Elm Street. There's this creepy nun who still haunts my dreams. She's wearing the all-white away game habit. It's the color rush habit that she'd wear if she was Thursday Night Football. And she just appears in the background. Then she starts giving advice to the sort of the head of the institution as far as like what to do. And he just thinks it's like some, random old nun from the convent. Turns out, very end of the movie, the denouement, if you will, we've saved the day, we think. The world is safe, but for how long? Nancy doesn't make it out alive, R.I.P. The head of the institution is looking for this nun. He sees her from a distance, and he runs and he turns a corner. What does he find? A grave. She's been dead the whole time. It's the ghost. And what's her name? You guessed it. Amanda Krueger. It was Freddy's freaking mom. It was Freddy's mom the whole time. God, it's so good. Am I crazy, or does Dream Warriors not deserve its fresh rating? I'm so happy to see that. It
does. Yeah.
No, it definitely does. And I will say too, just the idea that they had a movie in that franchise that had that many fresh entries. Halloween would die for this. Yeah. Halloween would die for these numbers. It really does. When you think about it, like I would say, where's Evil Dead? Evil Dead, both of them were good, right?
Yeah, I prefer the second one, but yeah.
But I would just say, like, I really do feel that the whole franchise, average wise, but just also where you look at it, like you could honestly make an argument that it has 2, maybe even 3 top tier entries, depending on the criteria.
Yeah. No, yeah. And I definitely think Dream Warriors is that one. That is like the definitive. As much as I love Freddy 2, Dream Warriors is the best one. And yeah, like Frank Darabont helped write the script, and like, so you have people that like actually care about the franchise. And I think, like, especially with that movie, as much as I love it, there's so much like even more potential that I think they could have done with it too. Like, this movie walked so Inception can run. This movie is pretty much Inception, if you really think about it.
Ooh, that was a pull.
And like,
Let's shout out that pull right there.
Okay. Well, thank you. I'm sure someone said it. I'm sure somebody said it.
No,
before.
I really love that. That's really smart.
But and there's so many cool ideas, because this is where the movies start to become kind of like the kill of the day, where Freddy, they start to come up, not so much with Dream Warriors, because Dream Warriors is actually kind of smart, but with the franchise just overall, the writer is just like, okay, how can we kill people in dreams? And they start doing that. And then they introduce the jokes with Freddy. But with Dream Warriors in particular, it rides the line so perfectly of being scary and also a little campy and fun, with Freddy starting to have those one-liners, but he's doing it in service of tormenting them, not just for the sake of being a joke. And that's what makes that movie so great. And also the same thing with Amanda Kruger popping in. You add in this sort of like classical a ghost story into the mix, where like a ghost is like giving you this information that's trying to help you with the rest of the plot. And it all just kind of comes together so beautifully. And you know, they go down the rabbit hole with Amanda Kruger eventually in 4 and 5, and it gets a little crazy, but that one in particular is just so great. Also, I do love that they killed Nancy in that movie, because, and you know, like studios could probably still do this, but they can't really do the whole like Halloween 2018 where they bring back and they just do a straight sequel, because everybody loves Dream Warriors, and you're not going to ignore Dream Warriors, and Nancy's dead, so you can't bring her back.
Can't ignore Dream Warriors.
Unless they do like a straight sequel to New Nightmare, which I think would be interesting, and that would probably be the best way to go.
I was like, Christian. Hey, anybody, y'all need to get Christian on this thing. Like, I mean, maybe it's that I don't think of horror franchises this way, but I've never examined like which in an entry is the one that you build from, but like that is like New Nightmare is also one that I personally like more than the first one. I wouldn't say it's a better movie. I just like it more.
There's so much fertile ground there. I think with both Dream Warriors and Wes Craven's New Nightmare, and you can't understate how necessary Wes Craven's New Nightmare was to the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, because after we get through Dream Warriors, which was part 3, the next one that I really care about, despite my affinity / terror of Amanda Kruger, is Nightmare on Elm Street 6, Freddy's Dead, the final nightmare. And I love that movie because that just leans so far into Freddy doing Thursday night, the late show at the Funny Bone. And part of that is like, it was the day that school let out. Me and my buddies ran to the movie theater because that was like that nice period in the early 90s where whoever was working there did not care if the movie was rated R. They're like, just get in here. We just need the business. So they handed you the 3D glasses. That movie was in 3D, and so the claws like came at you, and it was like a pretty cool theater experience. The movie does not hold up as well upon rewatching it, but there's also just a cool factoid in that movie where you are having a dream, and I think one of the counselors in Freddy's Dead reveals this, is that he's having a dream and Freddy's in there, and then right before somebody pulls him out of the dream and he wakes up, he grabs Freddy's sweater and he pulls it, and so you can actually pull stuff from the dream world into the real world, and then that's how you get him. So it's not that well executed as far as how to get Freddy in the end, but it's a cool little piece of, oh, we can also do this, so maybe this is how we defeat this guy. But after that movie, you watch it and you're like, yeah, we got some good laughs. Now I'm playing with power. There's some funny lines from Freddy. You know that we got to entirely reboot this thing or go super meta, which is what Wes Craven ended up doing.
Yeah.
I have a question for you, Christian, just out of curiosity with Dream Master. Do you think it's like a bad idea to do a sequel off of Dream Master? Or are you just saying it's not going to work as well because
off
of where they
Dream Warriors?
Dream Warriors. Sorry, Dream Warriors.
I mean, I mean, honestly, they could literally say like, "Oh yeah, she survived," you know, like they could do whatever they want, and I'm sure people will go out and see it and they'll enjoy it. Then they very much could do just a straight sequel to the original Nightmare on Elm Street, and people will be like, because you know the Halloween franchise has rebooted itself within its franchise, and Jamie Lee Curtis has played Laurie Strode as multiple timelines of herself, anyways, even after she's like died. So they could literally do anything. But I think like the best way to do just a new Nightmare on Elm Street movie is just to like make it a new entry, like make it number 7, and then just start fresh, all new characters. We don't need. I am a little tired of the nostalgic and bringing back people from the past, and like I think that's great, giving those people work. But give me some fresh faces. I think the new Scream movie did a great job of doing such that they granted they brought back the original cast, but they focused so much on the new cast and they were great. And so I think, and then you also cast a new Freddy and you start a new franchise. Just start a whole new trilogy.
I mean,
fortunately, we tried that, and I think this is just me putting on my studio exec hat now. It's like, well, we tried that in 2010 by just rebooting A Nightmare on Elm Street with Jackie Earle Haley stepping in to play the role of Freddy Krueger, and I think that did actually leave some fans cold because Robert Englund was still available and capable of playing it. They just wanted to go in a different direction, which I understand. They had a big rising star. Rooney Mara was one of the teenagers, but that movie, I don't think that it deserves to be as low as it is on the tomato meter. It's 14%, which is like, the audience score is 43%. And I think a lot of that is due to this being the first time that maybe a generation saw Freddy Krueger. And so it felt more original then. But I'm always up for more Freddy Krueger. I just feel like it's maybe just now in 2022, heading into next year, now we've left enough time pass to get that stench out of the room.
The one thing I will say is I think people, what they're realizing now, especially with these reboots, reboots, whatever, this is nothing new. This is the thing I get so irritated with people when they say that. It's like, okay, well, like literally at the beginning of Hollywood, when you have movies like Phantom of the Opera and other things, those were all like silent movies first. And then they made them into black and whites. Then they made them into colors. I'm like, Hollywood does this. It's just the timeline of the reboots and the revamps were longer. Our attention spans and distance between when they decided to do another one of them was longer. And we've just made that shorter. But I don't think it's a bad idea to keep reinventing it. And I think Scream is a good example, Christian. But I would say with Scream, what they did, which is I actually think the new version of the like reboot, whatever, is you have to get the audience in on the joke. That's what Scream did well. And I think that more than like if you bring in old people or if you make it completely new, I think the main thing is you have to treat the audience like they're smart. That's what I think Scream did that was different, is it didn't treat the audience like they were dumb with what they were doing.
Yeah. And I think they need a director and a writer who truly love the property that they're working on. Radio Silence, those guys are huge horror fans and they're great. Their movies are fantastic. And so they obviously love, and that's funny because it's also Wes Craven. So, you know, there's also like, I think that's another thing you have to keep in mind too, is like out of respect for him and his work, because he is so vital to the horror genre just in general, because he's made not just one, but two, even some argue 3 of the greatest horror films of all time. And so that's something I think that also has to be put out there. And, you know, with the 2010 remake, that, you know, that guy, the guy who directed it, was like Samuel Bayer. That was his only film he directed. I think he was like a commercial director. So they just kind of like plucked somebody out to do that. And, you know, I'm not a fan of that movie. I think there's a lot of stuff that is very interesting. I think Jackie Earle Haley is actually great in that role.
I do too.
And it's just a lot of like the stuff that they do with his origin in that movie is just like, because he's always been a child killer and not a child predator. It's like, that's not fun. Don't do that. That's just get that out of this fun fantasy horror film, you know?
Brian sent me a quick note to remind me of this, that he was a music video director. And I don't remember this particularly, but the one thing I liked about Freddy versus Jason is I felt that it was style over substance. Like it was so like, you know, whatever. This movie didn't seem like it understood that it wanted to be that. Like it almost feels like this is a movie where I feel a lot of push and pull between studio and director. Like maybe the director wanted it to be more substantive or substantial. Substantial. There you go. She's a writer.
You get the three of us in a room. We'll figure it out.
Yeah, we'll figure it out. It was. I think he wanted something more substantial. He wanted something more pushing the envelope, and I think the studio realized very quickly that they needed this, and I think that's why it feels herky jerky. Am I wrong?
I think
I haven't seen it in a long time.
It's also a Platinum Dunes movie, right? I think that's Michael Bay's company, and that's during the time when every horror film was being remade, and so I think that it just also gets pitted into all of that. Which I'll even say, the Friday the 13th remake, I think it's probably the best Friday the 13th movie that we've ever had.
It wasn't bad.
It's pretty good.
Yeah, and on Jacqueline's note earlier about how like most horror franchises would kill, literally, to have 3 fresh movies that are as highly regarded as Nightmare on Elm Street. Friday the 13th, I think it's just that first movie where it's not even Jason showing up yet to kill. It's Jason's mom running around, and it's barely fresh. It's like 62 or 63%. And so from there, it was pretty much all downhill for Friday the 13th. If we look at, I still think that you could have done a sequel to that 2010 A Nightmare on Elm Street because it still made some money, and you just don't go the Freddy's revenge route. You go right into more of the lore, and because Freddy wasn't that funny in the first movie. Back in '84, there were a couple barbs that he had, but he was still more menacing than he was hilarious. Then it gradually started enjoying the kills a little too much for most people's temperament. But if we go to the real question here, when we're all sitting around at bars talking about our favorite horror movies, for each one of y'all, is there a particular, I'll open it up to either a Freddy kill that he does that's creative, that really got your goat, or just a scare in any of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies that really stand out. For me, it is in Dream Warriors, and it's sort of a riff off of what we saw in the first Nightmare on Elm Street movie where his head comes through the wall. In Dream Warriors, it's like a giant version of Freddy's coming through and it takes up like the whole wall, and just a really cool look. So I love how he doesn't just kill, he has fun with it. Look, I'm not saying that's the hobby any listeners need to have. You probably shouldn't. But whatever you do, if you love it, it never feels like a job. If you love what you do, and you won't work a day in your life. Christian, Jacqueline, y'all got some great kills, some great moments in Nightmare on Elm Street lore for us.
I mean, you already said the one, Johnny Depp. I've watched that kill. That's also a kill that shows up in that video I was talking about.
And then the blood shoots up everywhere, and the parents are like, "What the hell is going on?"
Yeah, and I think they honestly cast Johnny Depp because he was just so gorgeous. Like they were like, I think the casting directors were just like, oh my gosh, and then he started doing his thing in acting in the movie, and they're like, oh wow, he's such a great talent. I think for me, I think the scariest moment for me is in the first Nightmare movie when Freddy is walking down the alley and his arms start stretching out. I think it's such a perfect blend of like dreamscape and realism, because you don't know if she's dreaming or if she's awake, and then he starts stretching his arms and doing all these things and taunting her by scratching his nails against the wall and just really, really tormenting her, really driving in that fear so that way he can get her. I think that's terrifying for me. But my favorite moment in the entire franchise is from Nightmare 4, which is the Dream Master. There's a moment when the Alice character and I don't know if it's her boyfriend, but Dan, the character, they are on their way to go rescue a friend, and they get stuck in this time loop. And they don't notice it. They do it like 3 times where they get in their truck, they drive off, they like turn a corner, or they're about to go into the house, and then they come back out through where they just started, and it just keeps going. And it's such a perfect little like, oh yeah, that's a dream. And I think that's like a little lightning in a bottle moment for them, especially because for that movie they're just like, well, what are we gonna do? And then, oh, we have this dream loop sequence that we can do. That's really cool. And I just think that's perfect. Like, I want more like really messing with not just the characters, but also mess with the audience a little bit. Like, make some weird dreamlike stuff in these movies, because as long as you establish like what the rules are, then you can start playing with them. Because if I have any like gripe with the franchise, is like, establish those rules a little bit better, because they do that in the first movie. Like, Mark, what you were mentioning about pulling stuff from out of the dream, and that's how you can get Freddy and pull him into the real world eventually.
Right.
Establish those a little bit better, and then you can start to have your fun.
Yeah, and I love that a lot of these kills too, especially the time loop one you're talking about, it sort of puts us, the audience, in that state where we don't know if we're asleep or awake anymore. And if if you're like a moron in college, you're trying to get into a fraternity, it's like they have like those stunts, like try to stay awake for 36 hours or whatever. And I can't stay awake for 5 hours now in my normal day. But it like kind of puts you in that like really deep, like meditative, like I don't know where I am right now. I need to rest and I'm terrified to do it. I think the perfect mix of everything that we've seen from Freddy happens in Wes Craven's New Nightmare, and it's when Nancy realizes exactly what the hell is the source of all this weird stuff that's going on with her kid, with her life, and she's in bed and she lifts up the covers and she looks there. Then Freddy's head is right there, and he just looks so sinister, and he just says, "Miss me?" Because it's Freddy being a little funny, but it's not Freddy telling jokes. It's also Freddy being like, "This is Demon Freddy, and he is coming after you." We cannot stop this conversation here in Movie Talk until we also reference. I might be in the minority here. I feel like the Freddy's theme is scarier than either Friday the 13th or, all apologies to the legend John Carpenter, Halloween, because this was the first one that I remember, like my sister and I staying up late, looking in the bathroom mirror and singing it, seeing if anything comes through. The 1, 2, Freddy's coming for you. Just the piano, that dun 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 dun. It's so good, and it still gives me chills when I hear it today. Best horror movie theme, Jacqueline Coley. Is it this, or do you go to the OG, another JC, John Carpenter?
John Carpenter or this.
Tubular Bells from Exorcist really gets me.
That's a good one. Yeah.
I mean, if
The
I had
Omen.
to say... No, I would have to say my favorite horror franchise, if I had to pick a franchise, and y'all are going to hate me for it, is Leprechaun. It is. It always will be.
This girl does not want to get scared, Christian. She's here for the laughs.
It's the best. It's the best. It's the best. I'm sorry. It's the best as far as what I want out of a horror movie, because my favorite horror movies are horror comedies to begin with. I cannot think of a movie that just really terrified. And most of the horrors that I really like the best are like more horror thrillers. So if you're just looking for something that I think can live in at least the we are really trying to scare you genre, Leprechaun. There's scary moments in Leprechaun. You cannot deny it.
Oh, yeah.
And Christian, I will say, just piggybacking off your Inception point, which was a lot more highbrow than what I'm about to say, you don't get Leprechaun unless you get Freddy first. You don't get that guy running around cracking jokes unless Freddy pioneered it a decade before. Christian Ruvalcaba, you can take the music cue, you can take any other scene, any other movie that you want to kind of close up shop here. You have the last word in Movie Talk for the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise.
Oh, if I'm going a Nightmare theme, I'm doing DJ Jazzy Jeff with the Fresh Prince theme for the Nightmare on Elm Street one. The Nightmare on My Street, I think that's what it was called.
Oh,
it's a great little song.
Remember
go
that?
Go check that song out. It's a good one.
Well done.
The theme. Good one. Good one on the theme.
As far as like themes go, I think the Nightmare one is definitely underrated. I think it should be talked about a lot more because we do talk about like John Carpenter's theme, especially with him coming back and doing the new movies.
The fact that it's him playing it is cool.
I think
fair.
The best thing about those movies, I haven't seen Halloween Ends at the time of this recording yet, but the best thing about those movies is the score that he's doing with his sons, and it's just brilliant stuff. Those things are really great, and I love this franchise so much. I'm glad they didn't go to space. Maybe Leprechaun went to space first and then it was Jason X. I can't remember which one came first. So maybe we can give some credit to Leprechaun or not. We have to fact check those. But I love this franchise and I want to see more. I want to see like a Mike Flanagan tackle a Nightmare on Elm Street because I think that would be
fair.
I think that would be perfect. Absolutely. And I think he's been gunning for it. I think I've seen some tweets from him where he's like, I can take a stab at this. I would love to see that. And I think it's been enough time for us to do that.
The time is right.
Have the kid from Stranger Things, the guy who played Vecna. He pretty much played Freddy Krueger in that show. So have him play him. So
interesting.
All right, Heather Langenkamp, one of the great final girls of all time. Justice for Kincaid, didn't get enough run, killed him off way too early in The Dream Master for my taste. But look, we could gripe all day about the little issues we have with Nightmare on Elm Street. It's an incredible horror franchise, and I think that Jack and I agree with Christian Ruvalcaba. It's time to have this see the light of day once again. Let's get more Freddy in our lives. Christian Ruvalcaba, I can't believe this is the first time I've actually had you as a guest here on Rotten Tomatoes is Wrong. You were fantastic. You aced the test as we knew you would. Thanks for joining us. Where can everybody find the stuff you're working on, including some of these great horror shorts that you put out with your company, Amateur Hour Films? It's really good, scary stuff.
Oh, thank you. We do occasional short films and sketches on YouTube, on Amateur Hour Films. Just look us up on YouTube. Got a couple up there now. We released a short film last Halloween that we shot like in a week, and then we just put it up. It's called Grandma. It's a lot of fun. And we actually have a Halloween fan film that we shot years ago, like almost like 6 years ago, called The Shape. Go check that one out. That one's coming up on its anniversary. And just working on a couple of other things right now. Just enjoying Spooky Month. And go check out our podcast, The Wanger Show. It's a lot of fun.
You creative types. The Wangers is every Monday night. The fellas get together. Occasionally they're joined by a guest. It's always a good time with a couple beers being thrown back. And so as we say goodnight here, Christian, you got a quick movie or TV recommendation for us, particularly for this time of year, something that the kids need to have on their radar?
I mean, I think if we're talking Nightmare on Elm Street, most of these movies are streaming right now and on various platforms, so I'd go check them out. If you can find the documentary Never Sleep Again, and you have 6 or 7 hours of your time, go and check that out, because it is fantastic, especially if you love these movies. And I'll even throw in the Friday the 13th one, because there's also like a 10-hour documentary on all the Friday the 13th movies in the same style as Never Sleep Again. Go watch those. Those are a lot of fun. Great Jaws documentary, great behind the scenes on The Exorcist, on Shudder. A lot of good stuff for horror fans to get below skin deep. You can email us anytime, rtiswrong@rottentomatoes.com. Subscribe, rate, review to this podcast, whatever your preferred platform asks you to do. Do it for us, because you just care that much about your friends here at Rotten Tomatoes is Wrong. That is Jacqueline Coley. Wonderful to have you back. And looking better than ever, covering stuff all over the world. Thank you for joining us, talking about some subject matter that, not always the best for you, but
I enjoyed our time together.
For me.
I enjoyed our time together, sir. Don't take it for that I didn't. I enjoyed our time.
Next week, we're keeping the creeps and the scares, and we're taking it to outer space, because we're talking about Event Horizon. That's going to be a really fun one. We need to talk about every scene.
With Mr. Fish. Mr.
Fishburne, who was in Nightmare on Elm Street 3. There we go. And that's going to do it for us here today. Thank you all so much for joining us at Rotten Tomatoes is Wrong. For the whole gang here, I am Mark Ellis. We'll see you next week. And in the meantime, to quote Freddy Krueger, you have the body, I have the brain.